right, we're going to go live. Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Mignot from The Flash, one of the producers here at Inkwell Beach, Cairns. We are so excited to have a phenomenal panel today brought to you by Carmichael Lynch. It's going to be a really evocative conversation about how this agency really tackled a challenging time last year in Minneapolis. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Audra, who will be leading this fantastic panel. And I'll let our next panelist, Regine, come up on stage. So enjoy, everyone.
Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone, to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited this morning, especially when we have no technical difficulties and we're all visible and smiling. That's a beautiful thing. So we want to welcome you to Carmichael Lynch's presentation of A Year in Minneapolis. This is really an opportunity to talk about commitment and promise to doing more and doing better in the workplace, also in the community, and for the clients as well. There's a lot going on there. We know that this has been a year of reckoning, an experience lived by all of us, and an opportunity to advance inclusion and social justice across an entire network, and also a remarkable portfolio of clients. So with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our happy panelists who are here today. Joining us here today are a few of the individuals at Carmichael Lynch who have really been important in spearheading some of this important work and support across the network and also within the community. So we'll start off with Marty Senn, who is right there in the black shirt. He's the Chief Creative Officer and also Managing Partner at Carmichael Lynch. Welcome, Marty.
Good morning.
We also have Regine Labossiere. She's the Associate Director of Media Relations and Co-Chair of Mosaic, an employee resource group. So good to see you, Regine.
Hello.
Also, we have Carol Haynesworth here. She's the Head of Multicultural Strategy and Inclusion and Director at Carmichael Lynch. Hello, Carol. Good morning.
Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here.
All right. And then last but not least, Orlee Tatarka, Carmichael Lynch's Director of Integrated Production and Senior Partner. Hello, Orlee.
Hello. Thanks for everything.
All right. So first of all, we're going to start off with you, Marty. We're circling back, okay, to the first of all, again, welcome to this panel. And thank you not only for your leadership there at Carmichael Lynch, but also a lot of people don't know, a resident of Minneapolis that's also navigating all of this with a family, okay? So what has it meant for you to be an agency in Minneapolis?
You know, I think that the whole idea of location in 2020 and 2021 is a bit of a mind bender. If you kind of think back to early pandemic, thinking March, April of last year, location became a weird neutral thing where I feel like agencies around the world suddenly felt really similar. We were all kind of working from our sofas and kitchen tables, no matter what city we were in. We were on Zoom, we were on Teams. In a weird way, we were all working on the same brief. It was a pivot brief, right? We got to switch all of our work over to social distancing. We're all looking for that same piano track that said we're all in it together. We're looking for stock footage of, empty streets on drones. So I think there was this kind of maybe not for individuals, but for agencies, there's this really collective experience. And then you flash forward to May 25th. And on May 25th, George Floyd was murdered. And it matters that he was murdered in Minneapolis. And he was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer on streets that, if you live here, we all know those streets. It's really familiar to us. It's our town. And I think that's when suddenly it felt like we had a different experience now. I don't think it felt as collective anymore that we were identifying with people from different cities in the same way that we were before. And I remember this feeling of watching, other agencies were posting things about it, and they were posting really nicely designed things on Instagram. And I remember that feeling of we're just not there yet. I think first we had to sort of stop and say, I think before we could be Carmichael Lynch or before we could be writers and art directors and producers and planners, we were people that live here. And like you said, we have families here. Whether you're in Minneapolis or St. Paul or the Twin Cities, this had a huge effect. And I think we kind of understood as managing partners, and not because we're terribly insightful people, but because we ourselves had to respond as people first, as humans in the community. And so I think what we really wanted to say was, before we can really respond as that agency voice, that in some ways I was jealous that others were able to do that so quickly. But we really had to say, you know what, we need to give people space the way that they need to process this themselves. Could mean different things. It meant different things for different people. I think for some people it meant it was a time to grieve, a time to protest. It could be a time to march. There's a lot of people that were making Costco runs and Venmoing, with coworkers to say like, hey, there's a food desert here now that we need to help out with. I think some people needed to sleep. I think that it sounds trivial, but I mean, people needed rest. People were up all night. I think something that maybe the media missed a little was, maybe a lot, honestly, was in the ensuing days and the ensuing weeks. There was an anxiety here. There was a real, I don't know the right word, but infiltration of outside agitators. I could be more pointed about that, but it's a lot of cars without license plates and tinted windows and cosplay warriors coming to kind of be arsonists and take advantage of being able to blame things on peaceful protesters. And I think, people were up all night with baseball bats protecting their neighborhoods with their neighbors. And so I think there's a real need to not jump right into agency business, but to say, hey, we need to take a minute, we need to make some space, and we need to kind of experience this individually as human people.
Marty, you gave me chills. You eloquently really described the human aspect of it, especially from the Minneapolis side of things, because obviously the rest of us saw things, what we thought was pretty clearly, but when you're actually there and feeling it, it's a completely different mindset. So my next question, you really touched on it a lot when we talk about the agency itself and how that all translates to the agency and the work that you still have in front of you. Knowing what you know now and going through what you've gone through, what would you say would be the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, there's a thank you for saying knowing what you know now, because I think you kind of go into this like, we don't know, right?
Right.
You're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. But what we know now was really guided a lot. We stole the name of this presentation from an email that our CEO, Marcus Fisher, wrote in the aftermath. And a few days after George Floyd was murdered. And the subject line was simply do more, do better. And that really kind of became a guiding light for us. And to be clear, that wasn't a directive. It was really an acknowledgement, because I think you could read that and say, oh, here we are managing partners. I just said, let's give people space. And I'm saying you need to do more and do better. Really was an acknowledgement, I think, as a leadership team. We needed to do more and we needed to do better. And I think we were hearing that, we're a 300 plus person agency, mostly in the Twin Cities, also in New York and around the country, Regine and Carol. But we're hearing from people, we're hearing from everybody that you need to do more, you need to do better. You managing partners need to do more and you need to do better. This is our city, and this didn't come out of nowhere, right? This isn't brand new to Minneapolis. And so here we are, and there was more we could do, and there was more that we could do better. And I think that became a really good rallying cry for us to say, I think inherent in those words, we weren't starting from scratch, right? I think there was training in place. We needed to double down on that. There were partnerships and relationships we had in the Twin Cities that we were able to reach out to and say, hey, we've worked it. What more do you need? How can we help the small businesses? Working with Meet Minneapolis, how can we dive in and say, now's not a time for tourism. It's a time to help the small businesses and really have them bringing people back to Minneapolis. We're able to dive into relationships we already had with places like Simpson Housing and Penumbra Theater and reach out and say, what do you need? Because we can do more. So I think it was good that we had some things in place already that we could build on. And then really looking at ourselves of how as an agency, can we do better for ourselves, for our people, but then also you have to start to look at your clients as well. I mean, start immediately, And so you can kind of hear, Audra, I'm almost talking out of both sides, because on the one hand, there's space, but we're also asking a lot of all the same people all at the same time. And I think that is a little bit what was unique to Minneapolis at that time too. All of these things are happening. I would love to tell you they were perfectly cadenced, but in fact, they're all happening at the same time. And I think something that we probably all learned a little bit is there might be a Pollyanna notion that, these are galvanizing events for agencies. maybe that's true, but I think for us, it was really important to notice that letting people experience these things individually and giving space for that, and then coming back together was maybe more galvanizing than saying, hey, we have to go right away, right off the bat.
Wow, you are the perfect interview / soundbite / almost therapist this morning. Thank you so much, Marty. A really good way to kind of sum things up, especially from your perspective. I really do appreciate that. Now let's talk about, you mentioned Regine, who was there on the East Coast as well. And we all know that employee resource groups were at the forefront of sharing when we talk about the pulse of the community with organizations. So we talked about the fact that you're the co-chair of Mosaic, also while you manage public relations strategy for clients. And this was and still is a critical time because corporations really are expected to take a stand and course correct. So I think we can all say that we look forward to learning what this meant for you as you led this critical body of work, especially at that time. I know a great deal of your employees live there in the Twin Cities. So what did your agency do to help them out, especially at that particular time?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here. Second of all, I can't believe I have to follow Marty because that was really eloquent and emotional and ridiculous that I'm next. So Marty did talk about this a little bit. He mentioned people first, human first. He mentioned not starting from scratch. And that's really true. Everything that the agency did and has been doing has been people first, human first. So Carmichael Lynch has an employee resource group called Mosaic. As you mentioned, I'm co-chair. And that's been in existence for years already. It is for and led by people of color and allies. And because it was already in existence, I mean, it became even more powerful and important last May when the world's kind of, erupted again, especially the world of the Twin Cities. Never before really did anyone at the agency have to deal with something so tragic, so close to home, that also became a symbol of racial equity in the entire country and remained that way throughout the pandemic, even through into this year. So it was a place for employees to go for a safe space beforehand, and then even more so, not just the people of Mosaic, but the entire agency. We had to give people time and resources to take care of themselves before they could take care of others, including taking care of clients, which, that is our bread and butter, but we as humans need to come first. And that's what the agency did. So this was important for a number of reasons. One, employees live or frequented the areas that were directly impacted by the police violence. And then also neighborhoods became protest sites. So having to live in a pandemic with your family at home, I think still full time at that time, if memory serves correct, but last year was an overall wind. And then having a protest site at your front door while having to also work and perform your duties, was just a ridiculous task that no one could have imagined beforehand. So to help with this, Carmichael Lynch gave time to employees either to volunteer outside the home, research to get more informed and to get smart in a way that maybe you hadn't been before. Just also take time for yourself for mental health reasons, especially during a quarantine, a time that was already stressful. But then also just gave time to volunteer in your community and give back at that moment to places and people that really needed it. There were a number of places that were mentioned in the news, like the Lake Street, food shelters and Lake Street cleanup and Lake Street Council and racial equity groups that were giving back to their own communities. So our agency gave time to employees to help out in that way, on the ground, if they felt safe doing so. But then also the safe space support that Mosaic had been known for kind of, grew for the entire agency. So there were safe spaces set up for the entire agency, virtually, of course. Then safe spaces set up for Mosaic as needed, and then also safe spaces set up. And, Carol has helped lead this just for Black employees at Carmichael Lynch, because even though, George Floyd was murdered May 25th, doesn't mean that there hasn't been a need to have these safe spaces throughout the year up until, any day this year. Mm-hmm. Plus, Black History Month took on a whole new meaning this year after all that's happened in 2020. And so there was a full, slate of programming throughout February, included bringing outside speakers in to talk about their own being Black in America perspectives and experiences in their industries and their everyday lives. And there was also something that Mosaic did called the Mosaic Revisionist History Series that allowed the education and conversation to continue online. So, for example, maybe you were taught that George Washington's teeth were made of wood. Well, in fact, they were made of teeth that, slaves or freed slaves had to sell of their own teeth just to survive and make money. So we did that series on Microsoft Teams just to help keep the conversation going and showing that Black history is more than just, this past year. It's more than just 400 years ago. It's ongoing. It's every day.
Yeah, and I felt like as you were talking, and even when it was Marty was talking, it feels like a parent that's got 10 kids of their own, and then someone dropped 5 more off on them, and you're constantly trying to take care of so many different areas and doing a great job at each one at the same time, and then learning all of the kids and things that you felt like you should have known or didn't know before. I mean, myself too, as an African American woman, I felt like I learned more in 2020 than I ever did, to be quite honest with you, about so many different things. So you talked about what you did in terms of the employees and the clients. When it comes to PR, how do you make sure that diversity is still part of that conversation and the messaging, especially when I feel like this as a journalist, I feel like so many people are nitpicking and noticing the smallest things in messaging and commercials and ads that might have kind of gone over our heads before. But for some reason, after 2020, things are sticking out a little bit more. So how do you navigate and deal with that messaging and the conversation now?
It's a great question, and hopefully we navigate it well is the very short answer. But it's very tricky. And as you mentioned, as a Black woman, as a Black woman in PR, having to deal with these messages, it's a very tricky space. But I just want to say that as Carmichael Lynch relate the PR side of the agency, everything that we do is looked through and strategized and executed through a lens of diversity, whether that's internal, client-facing, or public-facing. If it has a direct impact on our clients, it's looked at through a lens of diversity. There's kind of two things here. One was directly resulting from the events last year, and then one is our ongoing work. So at the same time as we employees were trying to process everything that was happening last year, emotionally and also just logistically, everything that we had to do, we also had to dive into our work, helping our clients figure out what to say as a brand. So we've been counseling clients throughout the past year about an environment that has shifted every minute from, as Marty was talking about, you pivot to the pandemic, then you pivot to racial justice during a pandemic, and then you pivot and pivot and pivot. So every minute that it's been shifting, we've been counseling clients, starting with ourselves first, conversation starters for employees to get to know the information better, have the resources that they need to have these kinds of conversations with clients. I mean, a simple question that we need to ask clients is, we had to ask ourselves is how to broach this topic with clients, because some clients might say, we're not political. What should we say here? So we talked internally first as an agency, and then different teams across the agency put together POVs and still do whenever there is a current event that in which we need to recommend the right messaging and counsel to clients. So that's been ongoing since essentially the start of the pandemic, and obviously through different times of the year. But like I said, more broadly, we approach all of our work through a diversity lens. So for example, there's one lifestyle client we partner with them to focus on diversity to make sure we're generating, that we're engaging with editors and influencers whose audiences would potentially provide a more diversified customer base and growth opportunity for the client. So with that client, we're partnering with them to develop different goals for each campaign. One goal that we always try to reach is 50% diversity. So if we're working on a campaign and we're pitching media and we're also engaging with influencers, we're just making sure that the group of media that we're pitching and the group of influencers that we're working with, we are reaching at least 50% diversity. And diversity always means, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ plus IA, and other factors. But with this lifestyle client, it also means, body type, for example. And we came to this goal based on brands industry data on customer demographics, which showed that Black and brown women were a growth industry for them, or a growth demographic for them. But that's just one direction. That just helps give us direction, but it's just one part of it, of diversity. We're talking about encompassing all identities here, just to make sure that we're reflecting the real customer of this brand. But then we also work very largely in the home and design space, and we counsel them based on who we should partner with, how we invest our resources, and measurable goals in order to achieve diversity in ways that matter for their business, the industry, that we're challenging them to surpass industry benchmarks. It's also important to know that in the home and design industry, there are certain groups that aren't underrepresented, and there are certain groups that are. So one example for a client is that more than 50% of our design council, because we often recommend panels for them of design experts and also influencers. So more than 50% of this design council is made up of Black designers, because Black people in this industry, the interior design industry, are underrepresented. And so for this specific council, we've got 7 members, 4 are Black and 2 are men. But we're always looking at it differently per client, right? So diversity, what counts as diversity differs per client. But we're also encouraging them to, even when they're not expecting it, to think differently about diversity. So for example, with one client, we have an influencer panel. It's a group of, I think, 5 for this client. And the influencers produce content that then can be repurposed on owned channels for the client. And this client wanted to repurpose some of the influencers' content for their own site. They told us which influencers whose work they wanted to use. And we noticed that it wasn't a particularly diverse group. And so we helped course correct, right? Because no matter what we're doing, no matter what the ask is, that's what we're always looking at to make sure that the customer base for this client is well represented. So those are just 2 examples. Another example is, I've been talking a lot, so this will be the last example, and then I'll move on. Another example is that there was a client that was working on a CSR report, and diversity and giving back to the planet and being sustainable have always been a part of their goals, but we helped them with the CSR report to make sure that there were true measurable goals that were put in place. So one of their goals is the leadership diversity goal. So increase diversity by 20% in 2025 with a focus on increasing women in managerial and supervisor roles. I had to read that stat because it was very specific. So we guided them on the right language, imagery, and content to use in this full report, just to make sure that diversity, equity, inclusion were apparent throughout. And then because they're measurable goals, anyone, including us as their counsel, can check back and make sure that they're on track to reach those goals. So I hope I answered your question.
You know, what I summed up from all this conversation is you don't have enough to do there. You're a little bored and
so bored.
We're going to send you a t-shirt that just says no pressure.
No pressure. I just want to say, obviously I'm only one person and there's an entire agency that does all of this.
Right. But people often don't realize how much research and what goes into, the final product. They have no idea whatsoever. So you guys are all to be commended just for doing that. It's a lot of pressure. It really is, especially now. So thank you very much, Regine. I appreciate that. Let's go up to Carol now. Hello, Carol.
Hi.
As you all know, we introduced her before. She's the lead multicultural strategy and inclusion at Carmichael Lynch. And both of those disciplines were really, really impacted last year with everything that was going on. So when it comes to your companies and your clients, do they really understand, like we were just talking about, do they really understand what goes into advertising, how much, plays into the roles and the stereotypes that could be seen in certain campaigns?
Yeah, I have been tremendously proud, I have to say, of our entire network, because such a large percentage of our clients aligned with the doing more and doing better. They were very reflective, and I think that's so important. In order for us to see the type of change that we hope for in our communities and in our industry, it really does take that self-reflection to see what are we doing well, where do we need to improve, and what contribution have we made to the situation that we are in today. And I think that many, like I said, of our portfolio had that honest conversation with themselves. And we continue to review so much work, like Regine just mentioned, from corporate social responsibility reports that were being revised to say, does this still address the most important needs? To seeing, are we representing the audiences correctly? They understand the power that they have in shaping perspective. And we try to be a partner in providing insights so that they can continue to better understand those audiences and so that they can continue to properly represent them, because the misrepresentation of these different audiences and their values is exactly what takes us to the place where we are today, where we do not understand each other, where we have not had open conversations about each other as a community, as a value, and about what we bring to the table. So we are incredibly proud of our network because we are growing together. Cultural competency is not the work of one person at Carmichael Lynch. Cultural competency is the challenge that we all take every day to make sure that our work is well representative of everyone.
That's amazing. Thank you, Karen. And then given with what you just said, given what's happened over the past year, has that changed the way that you guide the workplace and also your client work, just to make sure that you better serve the community? Has it shifted quite a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It has shifted dramatically, because there's a term that I read from the Harvard Business Review that I quote all the time, named corporate social responsibility. That means that prior to George Floyd's murder, everyone saw the work that we did as a checklist. These are the things that we're going to do. And if we do these things well, we have been an amazing company. But guess what? After the murder, that checklist is not our own checklist. It's one where we are accountable to the communities we serve and we live in. So we all now have to add that filter where, yes, we have to invest in our communities. Yes, we have to empower our communities in which we work and live in, because they are the communities that we speak about. Those are the voices that we uplift and that we share when we create these advertising campaigns. So has it changed? Yes. And I could say also that our managing partners and our CEO, I think they're active in making sure that every element of our corporation understands that imperative. And I say that because one thing that I think that has also changed is that for a long time, once again, we thought that it was that person in that office with that title that did that. Well, we understand that now, that it starts at the top and it permeates to the bottom once we see that everyone is aligned and is truly engaged and interested in doing more and doing better.
I don't think people understand that enough. It really does start at the top, because you could be doing, the God's work here at the bottom, but if you don't have that strong leadership, you will see it, you will feel it. It affects every single aspect of what you're doing. And, and it doesn't hurt to have talented employees right there by your side to kind of carry that work out as well.
Yeah, and Audra, I'd also want to add to that is why we're here. That's why we're here at CAD-CAN Diversity Collective, having this conversation and investing in this work, because once again, it's about action, everyone. It's about utilizing the platform and the resources that you have to make more space for everyone. And that's what this organization is doing, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Yep, mindsets have changed, that in a good way. That's a great thing. Thank you so much, Carol. Really appreciate it. Everyone here that you've seen on our panel so far does the heavy lifting, okay? And as Carol and other people have mentioned, these are just a few of the employees here on our panel. But another woman who does so much, and I have to commend her for really tapping into different pools of diversity to just really find great talent, is our next speaker, Orlee, who does an amazing, amazing job as the head of production there. Orlee, thank you so much for being with us too. And we understand the importance and the huge role that production plays when we talk about inclusion and representation in advertising. So I wanted to know from you, in the past year, how the conversation has changed and evolved within the production side of things.
I think, excuse me, I think that the conversation started probably a while ago with a lot of, who do we cast, right? How do we represent people on screen? So the conversations were just visual representation on screen, casting actors of, BIPOC talent, diverse ethnic, different backgrounds, having modern families, LGBTQIA, differently abled, and just being more representative of the world that we live in. But really the focus was who the cast is, right? And I think that was like a first step, but I think in the past year, the biggest change and the most important change is that the conversation's expanding beyond that, because telling the exact same stories with just different talent is not authentic, and it doesn't feel representative, and it doesn't feel right. The work isn't good. So I think that now that it's evolving to telling more stories and getting more perspective and elevating authentic voices, finding genuine ways to bring stories to life, and it's not just expanding who you cast as talent, but expanding representation on all sides of the camera. And I think throughout the entire process, what client, who gets to decide what stories you tell, what clients are at the table, who's the writer, who's the director, who's the editor, who's the stylist on set. I think that there's such a, you kind of can feel the inauthenticity when it's kind of trying to tell someone else's story. And I think that the production crews that we bring together, that every single person brings their perspective, brings their authenticity, it makes better and different work. And the other thing that has really changed this year is that there's a mandate now that we can and have to and have the responsibility to have these conversations with the clients. So I think before, people would be like, can we talk about it? I don't know. Is it political? It's like, it's not political. It's the world we live in. So we have to, and the clients have to engage in that conversation in a new way as well. There was this quote from Seth Godin that I love that he says, there's no all clarinet orchestras because the combination of instruments is precisely why orchestras work. And I think everyone's starting to understand that it really is not just like someone writes a script and you hire someone to make it. Everyone is going to bring their own talents, their own perspectives. And when that table looks like all the same people, the work isn't good and the story isn't there. So I'm excited that the conversation is really evolving beyond just, like Carol had mentioned, the checklist of like, who did we cast in the spots?
Exactly. Lots of deeper conversations, that's for sure. What would you say is the most critical thing really to address in production, just to make sure that you can increase representation in advertising, if you had to narrow it down to one or two things?
I would say that there is always this, it's hard to find talent, and I think that is, it's not true, right? And I think now the pandemic with everything going online also broke down barriers of access and, finding talent on social media, finding talent on music videos. But now the production industry is also, lifting up other voices, providing other opportunities to tell stories at all levels, find new talent, find directors, find editors who are already making things and bringing them into the industry. And also there's a huge groundswell of, if you can't find talent here, we'll provide it for you. There's so many things like public service, which is a Google Doc that is shared that just is a curated directory of image makers of color, right? There's Latinx design directory. There's Bid Black in film, people in craft. There's even hire Black female creatives. It could not be more spelled out that now you can't have the excuse of, it's really hard to find talent, because the talent is there. And it's always kind of been this like, they don't get an advertising, or we find people in ad schools. And I think that the past year, just the amount of content, I hate that word for this, but the amount of content people made on social media, being on the ground, being active, speaking their own authentic voice, you start to find different ways to tell different stories. And I think that's what's been, the biggest barrier was it was very easy to say we can't find talent. And now there's no excuses for that.
I've always felt very old school with the way that I've done things and how I looked at things, but I'm telling you, this new crop of talent that's come out in the past several years it challenges your way of thinking and your way of doing things altogether. If you don't want to roll with it, then you're going to get left behind. So I'm glad you're rolling with it, and that's a great thing. Thank you, Orlee. I'd like to ask our panelists to give us a learning or a takeaway from this past year. But before we do that, I just want to let our viewers and our attendees know that if you have any questions, you can type them in as well, and we'll get those in at the very end of them answering all of these questions too. So let's start off with you, Marty. If you had to share one takeaway from this last year that you think is really critical to advance media, advertising, inclusion, and social justice from your viewpoint, what would you say that would be?
One takeaway over the year I think that we've had, that's a hard question, but I think, attempting an answer would be that it's a practice. I think that's what I really like about the words do more, do better. I think it's a practice, and it's something we get up and we do every day. And that there's momentum to doing something every day, and there's momentum to approaching it like a practice. I think this idea that it's a destination, we're going to get there and we're all going to high five each other and say we did it is really false. And I think the more we can approach it with that do more, do better idea, that we won't get there. We'll never get there. But if we do more and do better every day, I think that's really important. I think kind of going all the way back, I think that's where Minneapolis becomes a really apt analogy. It's what does the city do? What does the community do after CNN leaves, right? And I think in agencies, like when you're done counting the likes on your social justice posts, what do you do then? And I think that's the work, and I think that's the practice. And just a super quick anecdote. A few weeks ago we had a really big new business pitch, and in agency life, that's a big deal, and it's a nervous deal, and it's an anxious deal. And we were getting ready for it, and no joke, we were 12 minutes from going on with the client. It was virtual like this, and they were assembled on their side. and the news alerts came out that the Derek Chauvin verdict was in, that it was going to be read. And, you know, in that moment, we kind of had to make a call, like, what do you do here, right? We've been waiting as a community for so long for that accountability. And then the business side of you has like, this is a really great new business opportunity we have on this side. And we had to make the call within that very quick time to say, you know what, we need to reschedule. We can't do this right now. We're not there for that work right now. We're there for the community right now. We're there for ourselves right now, quite honestly. We're going to experience this with our families, or however we ended up experiencing that. And I think to make that call, I think it shows that we can do that, right? And that we can be both things. And I think it just kind of, to us, it highlighted that like it is a practice and it's a small act. But then I think this new business opportunity, they'll learn something about us and how we will be also, and that we will approach things that way. So really, I just to kind of close on that thought though, like that doesn't mean we can't have an impact, right? I think that doesn't mean we can't do great things. It just means we got to do a little bit all the time and approach it that way.
Marty, do you feel like we're going to feel these kind of ripple effects and the differences in how we approach things for longer than a year from now? Do you think that a lot of this is permanent, would be permanent change in our way of thinking?
That's the question, right? I hope so. You know, I think you've got everything we're talking about now, plus pandemic, plus people working from home, plus look at all of us talking to each other in our homes. I think there's no way not to look at each other a little bit more as people and as whole people. And I think that effect, right? It's a responsibility that we have to make sure that it does. But I do think that, you know, we can't just look at each other like agency people anymore, because we see your homes and we see your kids, and you might have just heard my dog bark. Like we're people too. And I think that'll be a great thing for us, right? To be able to say like, well, for people too, then how do we approach this problem together?
Absolutely. Thank you, Marty. How about you, Regine? The same question. What would you say is the one takeaway for you?
This year really highlighted for me the fact that no matter what we're pitching or who we're pitching, or, you know, bringing to the table to clients the ideas that we should pitch and who we should pitch, that there's so much room at the table. The table is endlessly large, and that we in PR need to be the ones encouraging the idea that there is room at the table. And this is something that I've been learning throughout my career. And I remember very early on, we were different agency a long time ago. We were working, I think it was for an event for a client, and we were putting together the list of media that we wanted to invite. And there were at least one or two, you know, smaller Black-owned, Black audience publications that were on the list. And I was told, no, they were not the right audience for this. And I just let it go. That was early in my career. Maybe I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe I was too scared. Years later, obviously, I would like to say, obviously, I have changed my perspective, but this year really highlighted for me the fact that it is our job to make sure that clients see the benefit of the large and ever-growing table, and the ideas that we can bring to that table, and who we should invite to be a part of that conversation, because it just helps them in the end in their business.
Carol, how about you? What takeaway for you?
There is tremendous power in our voices individually and collectively. We saw it when in the midst of a pandemic with no vaccine, people took to the streets to speak what they thought was social injustice. And I think that we should all be inspired by that moment and by that movement to not allow us to go back to the world where silence was an option. So that is my key takeaway, that it doesn't matter what title you have or what role you are powerful enough, your voice is powerful enough to create the change that we hope to see, or the world that we hope to inherit to our children, right? So that is really what I would encourage everyone here to never allow yourself to be silenced, never leave a part of yourself behind when you go to a workplace or in your personal engagements, because when you leave yourself behind and you put on this coding language that we've been talking a lot and we had accepted for such a long time, you are leaving behind your entire community that you represent and that you were supposed to advocate with your simple presence and with your simple voice. So that has become incredibly clear to me. So like anyone that knows me knows exactly where I come from, what my background is, and I try to now be more mindful of that. And that is what I try to share with everyone. So it doesn't matter whether you work in advertising or whether you don't. There is a story that is told when you are in the room. And it is told more clearly and with more advocacy when you open your mouth and you speak for that group that you represent so beautifully.
Wow, absolutely. Very powerful. Thank you, Carol. I appreciate it. And how about you, Orlee? What would your takeaway be?
I mean, I would say just amen to what Carol said. Yeah, and I mean, along those same lines, I think the past year really cracked us all open, like you see there's no separation between work and home. This is my home. My kid's going to come in, I think we've normalized mental health conversations in a new and incredibly important way. I think we've had conversations with our colleagues that maybe people hadn't been having with their colleagues before and started to open their eyes to different lived experiences. Learning how to share our own truth, like Carol was saying, learning how to kind of speak who we are and what our story is. And just we've had no choice but to sit in discomfort for a year and a half, for a million different reasons. And I think that bringing that humanity and that vulnerability and that honesty into our work as storytellers and as marketers, it's a responsibility to not kind of go back to the old ways, like Marty was saying. It is a practice. It is a daily thing that we're going to have to continue, and that we get to continue, and I think it's our responsibility. And I think we all have become so much stronger through this year. And I think there's such a momentum, and you kind of can't just react anymore. You have to really just be in an ongoing practice.
And compassion is kind of turned up to the highest level at this point too. If whatever you didn't tap into is going to be tapped into now. So I totally agree with you. And I've got to say, although I don't come from the agency side of media, doing what I do in terms of interviewing people, and you hear friends of mine that work in local news that I'm talking every single night are they're putting themselves in jeopardy and in danger, because there are some very upset and angry people when it comes to how they feel they've been portrayed and how they feel we in the media view them. They don't oftentimes see us as people too, and the jobs that we have to do behind the scenes and what it takes to get it to this point. And so I'm seeing a lot of people asking for more conversation instead of just starting an argument or a fight or throwing things at the news vans. They really want to understand. So it's almost like all of us have to come back to a certain level to be able to rise back up again. So your mantra at the company, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, doing more and doing better, is really a collective action. We should all take that on as well every single day in order for us to see some type of progress. Otherwise, we're just clocking in and clocking out at this point in time. It's going to take a little extra effort too. So we all know that change is not convenient. It's not always easy. So what we want to do is commit all of you to kind of join on this journey here, because we know that together we can make a change. That's what we've seen here this morning with all of our panelists. This is a collective effort. It really is, because if nothing else, 2020 showed us that we really need to lean on each other as well. There's my alarm. That's not a duck in the house. It's the alarm, and we're right on time. So what I would like to do before we go is thank all of our panelists. You guys have done an absolutely amazing, amazing job. And I'm sure that after seeing something like this, there are people who are interested in wanting to work for the company or getting more information. So we've got some slides up here to give people an option to keep in touch as well with Carmichael Lynch. If they don't come up, I'll explain them as well. So, here they are, I believe. And there's a beautiful picture of Laura.
That's not let me do it. Oh, on.
Well, I can say in the meantime,
okay.
I will shamelessly plug that we are hiring as well. I'm not gonna miss an opportunity to say that. So,
there you go.
We're fortunate to be able to. So have to say that out loud.
Definitely hiring. Based in Minneapolis, correct?
We are,
okay.
and
right.
a presence in New York as well.
As well. All right. So if you are interested in getting information or looking at the careers as well, we'll tell you about the LinkedIn page. You can go there. It's Carmichael Lynch. Also the website, carmichaellynch.com/careers. And exclusively for this audience today, there's a direct contact that you can have, and I'll spell it out for you. It's Ed Huerta Margada, and the phone number is 612-334-6104. Again,
Light 'em up.
612-334-6104. Tell them Marty sent you. The email address is also cltalent@clynch.com. Again, cltalent@clynch.com. Pretty easy to remember. And if you want to learn more about Carmichael Lynch and their services, you can contact Erica Collins, and her email address is pretty easy, erica.collins@clynch.com. Oh, wow, I see a bunch of additions over here.
So
Founders joining. Oh, there we go.
yes. So hi, thank you guys so much. I just wanted to step in. I apologize for not being able to officially welcome you to the Can Diversity Collective's Inkwell Beach. This is our second virtual tour, and we know you guys are going to join us in Martha's Vineyard. This is essentially a prelude to everything fantastic that's going to happen at Martha's Vineyard. So we thank you for the support. We thank you for the incredible conversation and your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and supporting diverse talent and underestimated talent. That's the new term that Laura Fenton, one of our behind the scenes producers, shared with us. Supporting the underestimated talent is what we do. And I believe that Carmichael Lynch is on the right path to making sure that underestimated talent is taken care of. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Carol, Audra, Orlee, Marty, and our team member that left. Yes, thank you guys so much. And hopefully you'll stay tuned, because some of the things that you guys talked about in our next conversation that we're having with Dr. Dante Quick is on critical race theory, which gives us a whole sort of historic perspective of why we're in this space and place that we're in now. So it's going to be a deep conversation. I'm sure a lot of it will be over my head, but I'm going to focus in and pay intently attention, because it's something that I think we truly have to understand in order for us to get to the root of what's happening and to make some systemic change within all of our industry as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and of course the B for belonging. So again, thank you guys so much for joining. And we hopefully will see you all in Martha's Vineyard, and hopefully you'll join the rest of the conference.
That's right.
Thank you
Great
so
way
much.
to wrap it all up.
Yeah,